Hi, greetings everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're dialing from. We're very excited to have you today. And I also want to acknowledge the turbulent times that we're all in. So wherever you are, I hope you are staying safe. My name is Z, and I'm a consultant at the World Bank. And I'm very honored to be hosting this session today, the third session of World Bank's Circular Economy and Private Sector Development Series. We specially curated this series to understand how the private sector can be used as an engine to accelerate the world's transition to a regenerative and circular economy. But more than that, we also want to understand what is the private sector's perspective, how they view a circular economy as an opportunity, and what are some of the challenges there is to scale and to achieve a better new normal that we are all striving to get. In this third session of the series, we'll be focusing specifically on plastics. And I'm very honored to have a really excellent series of speakers that we have today. So I'm going to run through the agenda really quickly. So we'll have a presentation by Professor Geyer, who will give us a brief overview of the plastics pollution and present the latest data and evidence on the plastics problem and challenge. And then we'll move on to two deep dive panel discussions. Our first panel will be represented by champions from the private sector, and we will be discussing the latest innovative business models and some alternative materials to see what alternatives that we have to create a circular economy in plastics. And the second panel, we're bringing it to a macro level where we'll have speakers from Ellen MacArthur Foundation and Rwanda's Environment Management Authority. And we're going to discuss what are some of the enabling conditions that are necessary to catalyze this transition that we need to a circular economy of plastics. And then in the final session, we are opening it up to you. We'll be bringing in your questions from the YouTube stream. So I'll have colleagues there who will be taking in questions from the YouTube stream. So feel free to type in your comments, your questions, and we'll bring it to the panelists to discuss in the final Q&A. And in this final Q&A, we'll be involving all panelists. So we're bridging both private and public sector perspectives. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Karen Kemper, who will be providing opening remarks. So Dr. Karen Kemper is the Global Director of the World Bank's Global Practice on Environment, Natural Resources, and Blue Economy. This global practice provides financing, technical assistance, and knowledge solutions in areas such as blue economy, pollution management, forests and landscapes, and environmental economies. She has also served in a range of functions at the World Bank, including as the Senior Director of Environment and Natural Resources and the Senior Regional Advisor in the Office of Vice President of the Latin America and Caribbean region. Earlier, she was the Director of Climate Policy and Finance, and she also held management positions in environment, water resources management in South Asia and Latin America and Caribbean regions. As an institutional economist, she has published extensively on the economics of water resources management and has led studies on natural resources and environmental management worldwide. Dr. Kemper is a German national and holds a PhD in Water and Environmental Studies and a BSc in International Business Administration and Economics from Sweden. Dr. Kemper, welcome, and you give your remarks now.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Good evening to all of you in Asia. Good afternoon to all of you in ECA in Africa and MENA, and good morning to everyone in LAC and here in the Washington region. I'm very pleased to open this third session on circular economy and plastics in the learning series of circular economy and private sector development. In this session, we are going to discuss how governments, businesses, and consumers are starting to favor circular economy models to address today's plastics waste crisis. Now, as you all know, because that's why you tuned into this session, plastic pollution is everywhere. It's in the air we breathe, it's in Arctic ice, in water, and it's in the fish we eat. And the flow of plastic into rivers and oceans is getting worse as production and demand for plastic increases globally. Worldwide, plastics use has increased 20-fold in the past 50 years, and with population growth and economic growth, it continues to grow. And given this circular economy, given this trend, the circular economy interventions are critical in responding to plastics pollution in the long term. Now, COVID-19 has made matters worse. There's weaker consumer demand for recycled and reusable products because of hygiene concerns. And then the surge in protective personal equipment and in medical waste is adding pressure to existing and often very inadequate waste management systems, and the implementation of some policies and regulations that were in the pipeline has stalled. To introduce effective and sustainable policies and concrete actions to relieve the plastic problem, we first have to overcome some deeply entrenched obstacles to creating the proper enabling environment. Because in the context of COVID-19, there is also a very clear linkage at the moment to the oil price. A few years ago, fossil fuel subsidies reached 5.7 trillion US dollars, and that served to promote the production and overconsumption of plastics in several countries. Then, with the ongoing COVID-19 crisis, recycling markets have been upended by very low oil prices because they make virgin plastic much cheaper and therefore harder for recycled plastics to compete. To curb plastics production and dampen consumer demand, we therefore very urgently need fiscal and regulatory reforms that offer both attractive incentives and sizable financial resources, and that create a level playing field for everyone in the usage of recycled plastics or production of recycled plastics. There are also now reports about pretty massive investments in plastics producing industries, especially in developing countries at this moment in time. So such investments will lock in the plastics usage for a long time to come, and therefore policy interventions and decisions are actually very urgent at this very moment. That's why the World Bank is supporting client countries with lending operations, with technical assistance, and with analytical work on the management of plastic pollution, but also related to plastics production. Let me share with you just a few examples of the World Bank's work on plastics and circular economy approaches. The bank is helping Indonesia to reduce marine plastic waste by 70% by 2025. That's the stated goal of the Indonesian government. The bank is providing $100 million towards a $1.3 billion program on waste management that the government of Indonesia has developed. In Grenada, the bank is backing reforms that aim to ban styrofoam containers and plastic bags to minimize waste. As you can imagine, on islands specifically, the waste challenge is a very big one. And with another $50 million project called Plastic-Free Rivers and Seas, we are offering grants to finance innovations to reduce, collect, and manage plastic waste. Given the scope of the plastic waste crisis, the world needs a combination of solutions like these to drive new policies and change consumer and industry behaviors. We also need investments, innovation, and private sector interventions customized to each country. This is certainly not a one-size-fits-all approach. Each country has its own challenges, but also its own opportunities on how to deal with the plastics crisis. I'm convinced that this session will help explore solutions that will stop the leakage of plastics into our environment and stimulate discussions to encourage circular economy approaches. Finally, I invite you all to join our community of practice on circular economy and on marine plastics to learn more about how we are striving for the transition to circularity. Now, with that, let's hear more from Professor Geyer and our panelists today. I hope you will enjoy the session as much as I will. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Let me give you a brief introduction of Professor Geyer. So Roland is a professor at University of California, Santa Barbara, and he's no stranger to any of us here who are familiar with the plastics issue. And prior to joining the Brand School of UCSB, he held research positions in Germany, France, and UK. Since 2000, he has worked with a wide range of environmental organizations, trade associations, and companies on environmental sustainability issues. He has also won multiple awards for his work, such as International Statistician of the Year, and has been featured widely in media. He has a graduate degree in physics and a PhD in engineering. Roland, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Zeev. Thank you very much. And thank you, Rocky, for helping me with my ongoing technology issues here. Zee, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Excellent. So 15 minutes to give you a quick overview of plastic and the concerns that it causes. I called this 15 minutes plastic too much of a good thing. So why are we concerned about plastic? The first thing to note, which is shown here on the slide, is that plastic production has grown much faster than production of all other materials and economic output, GDP itself, which you can see clearly here. In fact, since the beginning of mass production of plastic in 1950, the compound annual growth rate of global plastic production, virgin plastic production, was over 8%. So the next thing is, of course, plastic is a synthetic material, so it doesn't naturally occur in the environment. So organisms in the environment have not evolved to deal with plastic, which is why it does not biodegrade in the natural environment. And again, here you can see it's the most recent of man-made materials. Again, mass production really only started around 70 years ago. But since then, annual production has grown dramatically, as you can see on this chart. And also plastic, really, it's such a useful material. It's being used everywhere in every sector, from textiles to building and construction, consumer products, electronics, transportation, and in particular packaging. So here you can see this is 2018 global plastic waste generation. We estimate that this was about 343 million metric tons. An astounding amount of material, and almost half of it was packaging of this waste generation. You see there's very little construction waste generation, which is due to the long lifetime of construction components. And now I've been told to turn on my camera, which I will do right now. Thank you, Rocky. What would I do without you? And actually, the second largest waste is textile. It makes up 15%. If we look at the same data from a polymer perspective rather than a consuming sector perspective, we can see that just 9 thermopolymers make up over 95% of total plastic waste. And again, you can see that not only are those 9 responsible for the lion's share of plastic waste, but just a handful of commodity polymers make up most of it. So you can see 32% is polyethylene, or number 2, number 4 plastic. Polypropylene comes next with 18%. This is in the recycling labeling. This is number 5 plastic, followed by PET. So those are our soda bottles and clamshells and thermoforms. And then again, fibers make up 15%. And also something that is relevant in terms of environmental concerns is that plastics also contain complex chemicals as additives. And we estimate that that is around 70% by mass. So a considerable amount of very complex chemicals, some of which we know to be toxic and hazardous, like flame retardants. So the next question is, how are we doing in terms of managing this enormous amount of annual waste generation? Well, we are doing better than we used to, but it's still not that great, which is where the concern about plastic waste is coming from. So as an alternative to landfill or just open dumps, recycling and incineration have been alternative waste management strategies since around 1980. And you can see that recycling rates and incineration rates globally, these are global estimates here, have increased over the decades, albeit slowly. So right now, we think that globally we might have a recycling rate of up to 20% and incineration rate of between 25 and 30%. And the rest, which is still considerably much than half, is either landfilled or ends in open dumps or is littered. So this is just a global average and estimate. Different countries manage their waste very differently. So here is a snapshot of just a few country recycling, incineration, and discard rates. So you can see Canada and USA have a hard time recycling their plastic waste. So in Canada, also incineration does not happen much. In the USA, a little bit more, but the vast majority in both countries ends up in landfill. China, we think, has an incineration rate of maybe around 30%, a recycling rate of 25%. So relies considerably less on landfill than Canada, USA. The EU, again, makes big efforts, but even there, the recycling rate in the EU 30 has not exceeded or has barely exceeded 30%. And you can also see that European Union countries rely very much on incineration as a waste management strategy for plastic. And here I also gave you some numbers for Indonesia, Uganda, but be aware that these recycling rates are not specific to plastic. So these are just generic recycling rates. So it's not clear what the plastic recycling rate in those two countries actually is. Very important for Europe and North America was that 50 to 60% of their plastic waste used to collected for recycling, used to go to China for recycling. So they really relied on China for actual recycling of the collected plastic waste. And since 2017, when China announced its National Sword program, that has changed rather dramatically because now they only allow the import of recyclables that are minimally contaminated. And that has proved to be a major problem to keep the contamination to a level that actually would still allow this recycling route. So now Europe and North America has to find a different way to manage its plastic waste. What are the environmental issues of plastic? It causes a variety of environmental issues. So here is I'd say, non-comprehensive list, and also an attempt to actually rank it in order of significance, because sometimes a solution may alleviate one environmental concern, but not another, or even aggravate another environmental concern, creating an environmental trade-off. So we need to navigate those environmental trade-offs. So plastic makes up about 6% of oil, global oil use, 4% of gas use. So I would say this is, in global terms, this is not significant, even though it's growing. When it comes to emissions during plastic polymer production, there are climate change, acidification, and smog emissions, all driven by fossil fuel combustion. Those add up to about 4 to 6% of global fossil greenhouse gas emissions. So it's not nothing, but I would call it somewhat significant. There are other emissions that cause human and ecotoxicity impacts. Those, I would argue, are actually of more concern than greenhouse gas emissions. And finally, as Karen mentioned, plastic, of course, is now itself an environmental pollutant, and it becomes more and more obvious that this is a big environmental concern that requires addressing. So what can be done about plastic pollution? Well, essentially, with all pollution, we can either remediate, control the pollution, or actually prevent the pollution from occurring in the first place, which of course the circular economy is part of. Remediation would be things like beach cleanups, or even you might have heard of the ocean cleanup, that is trying to remove plastic from the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Unfortunately, this is not where most of the plastic is in the environment. Pollution control would be things like landfill or even incineration, with the added benefit of recovering the calorific content and using it to make electricity. And then finally, we have pollution prevention. Essentially, there are three ways in which we can prevent pollution. We can just use less. That's frequently called source reduction. We can use it again. So this is the circular economy, or I also just call it reuse and recycling. And I'm excited to hear more about some of those technologies and initiatives in the panel. And finally, there's material substitution, so using something else. When it comes to material substitution, again, remember those potential environmental trade-offs. We need to pay attention to not just shift environmental burden from one concern to another. Say, reduce climate change at the expense of increasing eutrophication. So that's the loading of the environment with nutrients, which then leads to hypoxic zones in water bodies, or shifting environmental burden from one life cycle stage to another, I've tried to illustrate here in this graph. Finally, and maybe more important for this session, when it comes to the circular economy, for example, recycling, but this graph also applies to reuse, there are significant obstacles. There are good reasons why we don't already have the circular economy. So there are 4 obstacles that need to be overcome. And so there are actually 3 in order to make recycling or reuse an economic success, but even 4 if we want it to be an environmental success. So very briefly, let's go through them. So first of all, of course, we need to be able to collect the recyclables. So this can be a problem, and we need to be able to do that so in an economically viable way, and then sort it also and inspect it. I call that pre-processing. That is in itself important, but not enough. We then need reprocessing technology. So we need viable and economically viable, technically feasible recycling technology that takes the end-of-life material and turns it into a viable secondary material, or with reuse, a secondary product. And then, of course, these secondary materials, and that is the third constraint, they need to have market demand. And again, we heard Karin say that if this material, which sometimes is considered to be of, having lower quality than virgin material here, plastic, then it may, and is even more expensive than virgin plastic, then it will have a very hard time to compete. And most importantly, in environmental terms, the actual environmental benefits from reuse and recycling come from displacing secondary virgin materials and products. So in order for this to be an environmental success story, the secondary material, the secondary plastics need to reduce virgin material production. And again, as we just heard just minutes ago, virgin material production is very large and keeps growing. So since we completed our first initial study, there were three new data points that became available that are shown here, and you can see they sit very firmly on this red dashed trend of growing virgin plastic production. And if that trend were to continue unabated, then in 2050, we would have a global annual production of virgin plastic of 1.1 billion metric tons, something that I firmly believe is absolutely undesirable and unsustainable, which why my appeal to all of you out there is let's get together and help bend the curve of global virgin plastic production. And I hope I stayed in my time limit. I'm done here, Z, and thank you all for your kind attention out there.
Thank you so much, Roland, for the excellent presentation. Yeah, I completely agree. We need to bend the curve in reducing the production of virgin plastics. And, we are here today really to focus on how can we grow the solutions. And in the upcoming panel that I'll be moderating, I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers who are the leaders in introducing these solutions towards a more circular model for plastics. So our first panelist is Jana von Rabenau. She's the CEO and founder of Cyclus, and a former classmate of mine from Harvard. And she's currently leading an Indonesian startup that aims to reinvent the system of retail by selling consumer products in reusable packaging. And Jana comes from a background that intersects behavioral economics and international development. She completed her undergrad studies in philosophy and economics at LSE and her master's in public administration and international development at Harvard. She spends a bulk of her time working with low-income populations and studying and testing behavioral interventions. And during her experience in India, she witnessed how broken the retail system is, where low-income populations buy products in sachets that we often see in the countries that we live in. And that really inspired her to start Cyclus. Our second panelist is Sia Kian Ho, or Kian, who is the founder and managing director of Heng Hiap Industries in Malaysia. Heng Hiap Industries was established in 2002 and has since been in the forefront of developing and innovating plastic recycling technologies, having developed smart plastics to address plastic manufacturers' need for high-quality, customized, recycled plastic resin. Kian also designed the smart factory in Malaysia from scratch. The factory is now producing Glass House Ocean Plastic, while implementing a full track and trace program that directly addresses plastic consumers' concerns about marine pollution. And finally, our third panelist is Michael Salzberg, who is the Global Business Director at DuPont Biomaterials. There, he leads a portfolio of commercial and emerging businesses that utilizes renewable feedstocks rather than fossil fuel-based derivatives. Through the development of renewable biochemicals and biomaterials, Dr. Salzberg and his team are solving critical issues for industries as varied as packaging, cosmetics, apparel, and carpeting. He is truly a veteran of this industry with over 30 years of experience at DuPont, including R&D management, sales and marketing, and business development. And with that, let me start the Q&A with Michael. So, Michael, the term biomaterials itself is actually incredibly complex, and the lack of understanding of what a biomaterial is has at times been used as a smokescreen to sell products that are less green than what it is normally marketed as. Could you help us understand the important distinctions of biomaterials in terms of how they are sourced or how they are managed at the end of life? And when it comes to designing substitutes for plastics, what are some of the key criteria or standards followed by you and your team?
Great. Well, thank you, Z. Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of misinformation, a lot of what we call greenwashing out in the world today as people try to wrestle with a lot of the issues that Dr. Geyer laid out for us so articulately. Biomaterials sometimes to some people means materials that are used inside the body. So for medical purposes, we don't mean that in this context. And also within the context of sort of bulk materials like we've been talking about, there are really two different aspects of the material that feed into the circular economy question. The first one is, what is it made from, right? So we talked about the fact that almost all of these plastics that are out there today are made either from oil or natural gas. And so what that means, for example, is that all the production of these plastics is a very important part of the profitability of the whole fossil fuel industry. And so while, as Dr. Geyer pointed out, only a small portion of the material that comes out of a barrel of oil is actually plastic. The rest is typically fuels or other products. A lot of the profits that come from that barrel of oil come from plastics. And so the petro-based plastic industry really strongly contributes to the ongoing global warming concerns that come from the use of fossil fuels. So that's the first question. So often when we say biomaterials, we mean materials made from plant-based or renewable resources where the carbon was not extracted from the earth and taken out into the environment. The carbon came from plants that extracted the carbon from the atmosphere. The other kind of concern people sometimes will have is biodegradable materials. In other words, as Dr. Geyer pointed out, most plastics, when they go out into the environment, microbes don't recognize them, and so they don't get broken down. But you can design materials which are recognized by microbes in the environment and are broken down. And so what that really does is it's sort of I call it delayed incineration. Biodegradability is a great idea because if something gets out, it's sort of a fail-safe to, and if it gets into the ocean, let's say, if it can be degraded within the ocean, you won't have the plastic pollution, but you're still releasing all that carbon back into the atmosphere. So it's the same exact endpoint as what happens with incineration. So these two things play together. The choice of the carbon really just decides how much of the fossil fuel industry are we supporting, and also what happens if this material is either degraded or incinerated. Do we add more carbon, more fossil carbon into the ecosystem or not? And then the question around biomaterials, whether they can be recycled or biodegraded, that's an end of life question. So all that, as you said, it's a very complicated thing. We have to be very clear what we're talking about when we say biomaterials. Do we mean the source or do we mean the end use?
And just the final part of my question, when it comes to designing biomaterials for DuPont, what are some of the key criteria and standards that you follow and you and your team?
Yeah, and again, I really appreciated Dr. Geyer's presentation because he mentioned that it's very important not just to focus on one aspect of sustainability. So as he said, it would certainly be possible that you could come up with something that was made from plant-based carbon rather than fossil carbon and say, hey, look how great this is. But if the life cycle impact on the environment was worse, that wouldn't be good. So typically what we do is, number one, we want to make sure that any new material that we develop or any new process to make an existing material is substantially better in the overall impact on the environment from where does the feedstock come from all the way through to the end use, the whole life cycle. It has to be substantially better, not 5% better, but 30, 50, 80% better. So that's the first part. That's how we won't start a project unless we can see that it's going to be substantially better for the environment. And then the other really important aspect is consumers are the final decision makers on what materials get used. And so we have to make sure that any material we bring out really does solve the customer's problem and at a cost that they can afford. So, technical performance and cost and sustainability, all three of them are the legs of the stool. And we have to find what we call the sweet spot, the point that a new material can serve all three of those criteria.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And on the note of consumers, I want to bring this question to Jana, as Cyclus has chosen quite an interesting target market to operate the reusable packaging model in Indonesia. And Jana, could you tell us more about the target market of Cyclus, and how do you assess this in terms of it being an economic opportunity, and why haven't more companies entered, Indonesia and competing against Cyclus?
Yeah, so with Cyclus we sell consumer products like detergent, shampoo, coffee, as refills in stationary and mobile refill cards, and we focus on the lower to middle income segment. So a lot of our customers make quite little money, and they typically use sachets. So instead of buying, let's say, a bottle of shampoo or a refill pack of shampoo, they actually buy like 10 milliliters of shampoo, which is enough to wash your hair like once or twice. And so this is really like the mass market in Indonesia. And the reason we chose that was, one, from an impact standpoint, lower income segments are more likely to be excluded from waste management. So if you go to, I live in a nice neighborhood in Jakarta, and waste gets collected, like you can be sure, does it get recycled? Probably not, but it does not, just get thrown into the river, or like I don't have to like burn my trash to get rid of it. But in a lot of the low income neighborhoods and also other regions, that's not the case. And then our customers are a lot more price sensitive. So as we all know, plastic is very cheap, right? So if you offer a 10% saving to, on let's say shampoo or dishwashing liquid to someone like the speakers on this panel, like it's not a lot of saving actually as a portion of their income, right? At the end of the day, you're still going to wash your hair like every 2 days. You use a little bit of dishwashing liquid, but this is not going to be like a huge fraction of your income. And so we can actually offer much more significant savings to lower income customers. And in terms of like why there's not more companies doing this, well, I think it's interesting because I think there's actually quite a few companies that do focus on a lower income. So some are more famous, like Algramo, for example, in Chile. They focus on the lower income segment in Chile. But also in Indonesia, there's a lot of companies that are doing this, but they just don't have visibility. So in low income neighborhoods, it's very common to have perfume refill stations. So it's shops where you either bring your own bottle or you buy a bottle separately, and then you buy the content. And the next time you go, you don't have to purchase that fancy perfume bottle again. You bring the bottle that you already have. Also, a lot of the laundry shops that we see here, right? That don't buy from the big brands, they will get, a 5-liter jerry can of detergent, and they get a deposit on that. So when they buy again, they bring it back and it gets refilled. So, but a lot of these companies, they just don't get the visibility, right? They're quite small and they're not, they might not actually know that they're circular. So I actually think it's happening more than we know. And we're also now seeing like more of the sort of bigger players getting into the market. So I'm excited to see the future of refill revolution, particularly in sort of the mass market.
No, thank you for that. And I think that's a really great point, that there's a lot of players that are actually more circular than we think, but they're not, as sexy to be labeled as circular in the media. Yeah, like our small mom and pop shops that sell things in bulk, and they're often more affordable options, but I guess they don't appeal to the bourgeoisie class, and they're not getting a lot of limelight. I think that's a really great point. I want to shift the question to Ken. So Ken, I think the recycling industry is, we've heard a lot of challenges when it comes to recycling, given COVID, given low oil prices. Can you tell us what are some of the biggest challenges for the recycling industry in your point of view, be it internal or external? And what are some steps that you are taking to differentiate yourself from, other recyclers? How are you taking steps to build a lasting and resilient recycling business amid all these challenges?
Sure. I think I will be able to provide a ground up type of a case study or perspective, if you will, simply because I didn't choose recycling, but rather I was born in a recycler's family. So my parents started out being scavengers when I was at the age of 10. So we are the one that's collecting recyclable from household to household, which is what you see quite a fair bit here in Southeast Asia. The biggest problem when it comes to that challenge with the entire industry is definitely the fragmentation of the industrial landscape. So we started being a scavenger, and then a mobile pickers, yard owner, processor, and finally going on top as the aggregator. So the entire informal community, as some will call it, here in Malaysia, we are working with 28,000 independent grassroots collectors or recyclers here. So the fragmentation of that entire recycling landscape gives you basically three main problems. Number one, the inefficiency when it comes to labor. Number two, the non-value adding logistic. So it makes the logistic cost very, very high. And number three is the lack of standard that governs how this fragmentation work together. So the way that we address that is through integration. So we integrate it as such that through our integration, we can reduce the labor costs, the logistic costs. But the most important thing is by sharing our internal standard as the de facto industrial standard. So what happened is that then that governs how 28,000 of these independent recyclers work together. So we are able to give the marginal pricing depending on the process that they have done following our playbook. So the de facto industrial standard is basically our playbook so that we can consistently convert that plastic scrap that is very mixed scrap, contaminated, and we basically have ways to intercept it before it gets contaminated, and so that we can actually get very consistent feedstock. Once we get that consistent purity or homogeneity of that feedstock with certain integrity, we can then convert it into that consistent base material, if you will. And from there, we can produce the smart plastic material, which we are now exporting to 33 different countries, being a global supplier to companies like Panasonic and Honda and LG. And all these are actually very, very important things. And I think Professor Gaya mentioned about that earlier on. So the first three challenges, you talk about collection. How are you going to mobilize this informal community, which I think are the basically the invisible hands to autopilot plastic recycling here in Malaysia and in many parts of Southeast Asia. And then with that playbook, we are then able to convert that scrap into a consistent base material. And after that, we must make sure that we fulfill all the top industrial standard. So our company basically will fulfill all the ISO 9000, 14,000, 45,000, CDEX. All these are very, very important to make sure that the end result of that can create the market demand that Professor Gaya mentioned earlier on, that a designer can actually spec in this material into their product and say, hey, I can expect very consistent material that fulfills all the integrity, fulfills all the standard, and I can expect the volume and the consistency that I can then communicate to my customer about my contribution when it comes to sustainability. So that's a short version of what we are doing here.
Thank you so much, Ken. And I think that's a really brilliant point about, creating the standard and defining the process to a certain extent that you are able to meet the demands of who your consumers are and how to engender successful collaborations as a result of that. And I want to turn this question to both Yana and Michael. So I know that the both of you have also collaborated with major companies and worked with other partners to create more circular products for consumers. Could you enlighten us on some of the experiences that you've had in terms of collaborating with other partners to bring to market products that are viable for the consumers? Michael, you can kick it off.
Oh,
if you
okay. I
like.
was gonna toss it to Yana, but that's fine. Sure. So the perspective I bring is from all the way back in the value chain of the supply chain, right? We're a material supplier, so it's very humbling for me to listen to some of these amazing things that are happening closer to the consumer, to the user. But typically, where we're able to work with partners is around as they think about designing their new products, whether it's a formulation or packaging or the material itself. We try to work with them to make their products more sustainable. And as we've mentioned, I've been around a long time. So 15 years ago, there was a lot of empty talk about sustainability being important to brands and to consumers. That's really changed. So all around the world, I think consumers are demanding that they whatever product they're buying is made in a sustainable way, and that when they're finished using it, there's some responsible way to dispose of that product. So that's really changed the whole dynamic in the value chain, because in the end, the brands are the people that decide what kind of packaging gets used and what's the composition of the products, and they respond to consumers. So in the last few years, I've really seen a huge uptick in demand as people realize the problems that are out there with global warming, with marine pollution, that sort of thing. So I think it's really exciting to watch how this is changing. In the past, there was a lot of lip service and not a lot of work or money put behind actually changing how products are designed. What I see now is there's a huge demand from brands for recycled products like the ones we just heard about, and also for biomaterials. At the moment, I think, frankly, the supply is lagging the demand. So we need more people to do the kind of work that that we just heard from Ken around providing recycled products. There's lots of demand for them, and also what we're finding in our materials is there's a huge amount of demand for bio-based materials as well. Thank you.
And Michael, I just want to push you a little bit further. Can you tell us some of the exciting products and collaborations that you've had with other partners? And I know you have some very good
Oh,
examples.
yeah, no, sure. Yeah, I'm very happy to do that. It gets me very excited. Yeah, so typically we play in two major value chains. We play in the textile value chain, which, as we heard from Dr. Geyer, is a big part of the problem here. And also we play in the carpet value chain, which is another big user of plastic. So for example, in textiles, one of the biggest things we've done is we have a product that's made from plant-based resources, and it creates a polymer that we call Sorona that can be used to replace, for example, spandex in stretch fabric. So everybody wants their clothes to be stretchy, whether it's yoga pants or just jeans. Everybody wants to add that element of stretch. And one of the reasons that there's so much textile waste is that after a few washings, many clothes, people become dissatisfied with them and they throw them out. So with our Sorona, what we're able to do is work with brands and textile designers to come up with fabrics that last much, much longer. So you start with a partially bio-based fiber to replace spandex, which is petro-based, and you put it into a fabric which then can last a lot longer, and you can wash it many more times without it losing its functionality, the stretchy fabric. So that's a way that we're able to help to reduce the amount of waste from the beginning. Because again, not generating the waste in the first place, using our products longer is the best thing we can do. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the kind of carbon that we use, whether it's fossil carbon or plant-based, also really matters, because again, if it biodegrades or is incinerated, we don't want to be part of the problem for global warming. So there's that kind of thing. We do lots of other work with people like, the Procters and Gambles in the world that are formulating products. They're replacing petro-based products with bio-based. And we're also doing a lot of work on packaging to help brands design package where they can use much, much less plastic to do the same job. So those are some examples. Thank you, Z.
Thank you. And I think this is a good segue to Yana, who I'm sure can speak more about her pilots with major FMCG companies and what are some of the lessons we can take away from it. Yana, we don't hear you. At least I don't hear you.
Me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Perfect.
Okay,
Perfect.
let's take them off. So I think one thing I really learned is sort of how to like a focus on hygiene, right? So I think the big concern that always comes from not from the customer but from the FMCG is, you know, is this really hygienic, right? Like what kind of containers do people bring, right? Could there be any like micro contamination? And I think really focusing on that and how to make it hygienic and safe is really important. And I think one thing that makes it very hard to do refill for these products is, you know, here, for example, refills for rice is very common, but rice is very hard to like mix it with water, right? Like you can see, right? You can see it visibly, but with dishwashing liquid, it's so easy to mix 10% of water and nobody can notice that it's been tampered with, right? And so this has been one big learning. Another learning was, you know, how do we really make our supply chain truly circular? And so with now with some of the FMCGs, we're actually getting the product in 20-liter jerry cans that they then, with the next delivery, pick up and refill, which is really like a circular system. And I think finally, what we're also learning is, you know, how do we make the product more appealing beyond just, practicality and price. And it's been interesting because initially our marketing was really like more like down to earth, sort of more. This is our target customer is more from the lower middle income segment. But when you look at the products they buy, like Pantene and Sunlight and all these products, they're actually really playing at, you know, the aspirations of the poor, right? They show these sort of like glamorous families in the ads, and I think what we see an opportunity in refills is to actually make it more premium, right? To say, usually you might not be able to afford this like fancy bottle because, you know, let's say you need to buy shampoo like every 2 weeks. It'd be crazy to buy like all these bottles. But now that you can have one reusable bottle, you can actually have that premium experience without the premium price. And I think this is something that we're now trying to basically elevate our product to this more premium product at an affordable price.
Thank you so much. So I think we have about 10 minutes left, and I think one area that I want to cover is, you know, the focus of a lot of people on this call. I expect a lot of my colleagues from the World Bank are tuning in, and we work in developing country context. And one major obstacle or one major characteristic of working in developing country context is the informal sector, and it plays a very significant role in the recovery and the circular ecosystem. So this is a question to Kian. So I know that your company, you know, has built, you know, very strong relationships with the informal sector. Can you speak more to how you navigate and build these relationships? And related to that, could you provide, you know, some insights on how companies can source, you know, viable, consistent secondary material from the market, from the collectors?
Sure. I think one of the things is the power of marginal pricing advantage. That means basically we are able to put a price tag on any scrap that's actually presented to us. Not only we can put a price tag on that, we actually have a playbook that explains to the informal community what they should do in order to increase the inherent property. Now, I like what Michael said earlier on about that sweet spot, because that sweet spot basically means value creation. When we look at plastic scrap, informal community are the one who actually know and recognize the inherent, the informal community are the ones that actually know the inherent property of all this plastic scrap. And we just need to enhance that knowledge by telling them how. So having that playbook basically will basically guide them, by throwing things on the right and throwing things on the left. It gives them different pricing advantage, and why after that we will do the test and break down with a spider web chart so that they have better clarity about area under curve of that spider web chart, and then things start to iterate very, very differently. And having that playbook, it's something that is very important to work with informal community. And going forward, that part, it's not just all. We must be able to come out with product that fulfill all the standard. Let the paper speak. The validation is something that's very important. Let that product, speak for itself. Let the quality and the consistency speak for itself. Relationship is important, but the quality is actually even more important. So by converting, some of that art to science, then they will be able to make better decision, better utilization of their resource allocation. And for us, what we are doing here is that we are taking that to a next step, that basically moving that de facto industrial standard to become an algorithm by digitalizing them all together. And I think that is the next phase that we're super excited about.
Thank you. I think that's a really, really exciting note. The next steps, right? Like how do we scale, the solutions that are working now? How do we create that next leap? And I want to bring this question to Michael. What do you think is the next growth stage of biomaterials or bioplastics? As it is now, the share of bioplastics in the market is extremely small. I think less than 1% in the countries that at least that I'm familiar with. So Michael, what do you think is this next step for the biomaterials industry that can really accelerate this transition?
Yeah, so thanks, Z. As I mentioned earlier, in the past, I think the problem was lack of demand. There really was only sort of lip service about the value of these kind of materials. What we see now is that's no longer the problem. Now, really, the problem is some of the competitive issues. Dr. Guy mentioned some of them earlier. What happens today is when people pump oil or natural gas out of the ground and then they put it out into the atmosphere, there's no cost. They don't see it. They don't have to pay any cost for doing that. We as a society pay the cost, but there's no cost for them. And so frankly, we in the biomaterials industry will continue to innovate, but we're really facing an uneven playing field because these guys have essentially no cost for the material they're pumping out of the ground except the extraction cost. And so I think the next phase is going to be that as consumers and citizens demand that we do a more responsible job with all the amazing statistics that we heard from our first two speakers, I think the political consensus is growing. The next phase is to put some measures in place politically that recognize the actual cost of using petro-based materials versus the benefits of plant-based that support farmers and use renewable carbon. So I think we'll continue to grow. We're growing actually very quickly right now, but from a very small base, as you mentioned. I think what'll really change it is when it becomes clear that carbon that comes from a recycling operation, like Ken talked about, or plastics that come from a recycling operation, or plastics that come from a bio-based source, when those materials are actually cost competitive with the petro-based ones, because the petro-based people have to recognize the actual cost that they bring forward. When that happens, you'll see an inflection point, and you'll see a lot more adoption of recycled materials and a lot more adoption of bio-based materials. But right now, it's not an even playing field. I feel optimistic it'll change, but it does need to change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. And speaking of even playing fields and creating that transition to make the circular models competitive at a macro point of view, I think this is a really good segue into our second panel of today, where we'll be inviting speakers that will provide a multilateral and national perspective on the circular economy of plastics. And with this, let me introduce the moderator for the next session. 1 second, I just want to share the screen so we have all the panelists for the next session that will show on the screen. 1 second. Okay, hopefully this works. Okay, great. So let me introduce to you with great excitement, Delphine, who will be moderating the next panel. And Delphine is a colleague of mine at the World Bank, and she's leading World Bank's work on marine plastics and pollution prevention. She has more than 20 years of experience in solid waste and pollution management and assessments of high-risk infrastructure. Delphine holds a PhD in geochemistry and hydrogeology from Mine School of Paris, France, and a Master of Geology and Earth Sciences from Paris. And with this, I'll hand it over to Delphine.
Thank you, Thi. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're based in the world. Very happy to be here. Thank you to Thi and Etienne Keffichan for inviting me to moderate this panel. This is a very exciting panel. We just heard some excellent feedback and input from private sector initiatives. So I'm very excited to complement these views by how do we catalyze the transition by working from both private companies and also from the public sector. And I think that we all know that transitioning to a circular economy means bringing together public and private sectors and providing an enabling environment. So what does this mean, this enabling environment? And this is what we are going to hear today from our two excellent panelists that I'm going to introduce right now. So Juliette Kabera is the Director General of the Rwanda Environment Management Authority, to which she was appointed in May 2020. Prior to this appointment, she held the position of Director General of Environment and Climate Change at the Ministry of Environment. She began her career as an environment management officer at a time when Rwanda was developing much of its forward-looking environmental institutions and policies. As the Montreal Protocol focal point then, she was at the forefront of negotiations of the amendment to the Montreal Protocol, and she took an active role in the drafting and enforcement of different laws, such as the 2018 law banning plastic bags in Rwanda, which has been very innovative, as you all know, and then 2019 law banning single-use plastics. Juliette currently serves as the chair of the executive committee of the Multilateral Fund of the Montreal Protocol. Juliette, welcome. And I would like also to introduce Sander de Fritz from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Sander leads the New Plastic Economy Initiative, which is an ambitious global initiative bringing together key stakeholders to rethink and redesign the future of plastics, and starting with packaging. So the New Plastic Economy Global Commitment and Network of Plastic Pacts, more than 1,000 organizations around the world have united behind a common vision of a circular economy for plastics and concrete 2025 targets to help realize that vision. Before joining the foundation, Sander worked as a management consultant at McKinsey & Company. During his period there in the McKinsey Center for Business and Environment, he was part of the core team publishing the report, Growth Within, a Circular Economy Vision for a Competitive Europe. Sander has a background in mechanical engineering. So welcome, Sander. So before we deep dive into the panel, I've been asked to present very briefly a little bit of what the World Bank is doing and what ProBlue is doing. So I'm going to try to share my screen and share a few slides on that. I hope you're going to see it. All right, so just a brief word, and you've heard already from our previous panelists and from Karen Kemper and Professor Geyer earlier in this event about the solution. So I think that the approach that we are following in the bank is really a comprehensive approach that start with stopping the leakage, creating the circular economy, and restore ecosystems. So it requires a combination of solutions such as new policy that we're going to talk about a little bit now, behavior change. We've heard that from the industry, innovation, again, we've just heard about that, and private sector interventions customized to each country and municipality. So that combination is something that countries have to understand, and to help countries achieve this goal, the bank is intervening in a number of countries. We have a little bit more than 40 engagements in countries, and that span around multiple sectors, from solid waste management, but also what is the role of tourism, including on circular economy, how fisheries also can play a role with plastic prevention activities. So I just wanted to bring that big picture because we have in the bank set up a program called ProBlue since 2018 with the support of Canada, the European Commission, France, Germany, Sweden, Iceland, Norway, and the United States and Denmark. So far in ProBlue, it's a program for the blue economy where we have a specific lens that covers marine pollution prevention and marine litter prevention, and with a big focus on plastics. So far, we have committed about 20 million in about 37 activities in countries and in regions to influence the agenda and help countries understand the pathways, the sources, try to define roadmaps and how to get there. And that requires some analytical work, some policy analysis that this program is helping achieve. Just to set the stage of the panel, I just want to look back a little bit in a very simplistic way to the plastic life cycle. I think that there are two things that we've heard so far about how do we keep the plastic molecules in the economy. So this is all about when plastic is already a waste, how do we capture it? How do we bring it back to the economy through recycling? And this has been covered already by Professor Geyer. But it's also about how do we make products recyclable? How do we think and we design and we manufacture, these products, and how we reimagine the way we consume them and how they are produced. So the regulatory options that we can think about, it's a lot of countries, and Juliette in Rwanda is going to talk about that, started with bans. And now there are many other instruments that can be put in place. It's really about creating the incentives and the general financial resources to improve solid waste management and expedite this transition to circularity that we are going to discuss today. So I just wanted to bring that perspective. And just as a last word and introduction to my next question, this requires partnerships. It's not only the question that the government can do alone and that the private sector can do alone. It's really about looking at what the actors on the private sector side can do and what the enablers, whether it's at the government level, the province level, or cities or industrial park that this series of learning has discussed about last week. That's what the enabling environment is about. And that's only that way that we can go to hopefully in an optimistic manner reach to the environment, to the solution, that we want to see. So I'm stopping there. And I want to give the floor to our panel. I would like to start with you, Juliette, starting with the experience from Rwanda. And among other countries, Rwanda is taking a lead in enacting plastic policies. So some parties may even describe Rwanda's approach as quite bold and ambitious at the time, given the strict restrictions on plastic ban and single-use plastic that you have enabled in Rwanda. So can you tell us a little bit more about the reasons why Rwanda has chosen this path, and what are the main lessons learned that you can share with us, including the challenges that you faced? Juliette, I think we don't hear you. I think you're still muted, Juliette, if you don't mind unmuting. Okay, while maybe Juliette has some technical issues, while we fix that, I'll come back to you. Oh, Juliette, are you here? Sorry, otherwise I would have switched to. Excellent.
I'm back. Sorry, had gotten disconnected a bit. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Thank you for that great intro. Amazing to see what the World Bank is doing in this area. So I lost you a little bit, but I heard you were talking about what Rwanda has done regarding the policy to manage plastic waste. Am I right?
Yes, absolutely. If you can speak about the challenges and the lessons learned that you faced in Rwanda.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So to start with, like you said, my government took a bold step, a bold, decision to ban the use of plastics, polythenes to be precise, polythene in 2008. And the challenges that we faced ever since then was getting alternatives was not easy. The law was very clear. The enforcement was really efficient, but alternatives were a big problem. They are still a little bit more costly and less available compared to polythene. That's one big challenge. And then the other one was, of course, mindset change. People still find it more convenient to use plastics. There could be other alternatives. There could be other reusable items, but people were still interested in going for the business as usual. So mindset change was also an issue which we had to tackle by doing education, awareness, and being consistent with the message that we are giving to our people. I think I mentioned about it, the alternatives being few on the market are also costly. So we were having less private investors coming into this area to invest because they needed, I think, they needed upfront costs to actually be able to cater for that amount that they need to start an alternative to plastics manufacturing factory. So here we saw government coming in with subsidy. We saw government coming in with concessional loans to private operators who wanted to come into this area, and it's not. We are not yet there. Even this morning we were having a meeting with the Ministry of Trade and Commerce, and we were still debating on the same challenges. So the challenges are mainly those of alternatives, mindset change, and less private operators coming into this area. And again, I think also research, we don't have a lot of information. We still had a limited amount of information on which type of packaging can better be used for different products. So limited information around alternatives was also an issue. So the lessons learned, I think I mentioned them on the way as I was moving on, was consistency. I cannot underscore that enough. You cannot say this today and say the other thing tomorrow when your government is speaking to the same people. So we needed to be firm and be consistent with the message that we're delivering. And we were convinced that we were delivering the right message because anyway, I think most of us know the dangers of plastics, but taking another step to actually address those challenges was the issue. So government needed to be in there as the bridge to actually continue sending the same message and aiding people to make that step. And where need be, we come in as the real enforcers to actually add a gentle push for people to move towards that direction. Thank you, Delphine.
Thank you, Juliette. Excellent, super interesting to hear about the consistency in the messaging. And that brings to another question on partnership with the private sectors. Can you share a little bit more your perspective on how you created this buy-in, including by how you conveyed the message? How was it received from the industry? And then draw some lesson on the role of the government to ensure that the policy measures that you've created were inclusive and that they create the space to promote alternatives that you mentioned in local manufacturing and different products. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Okay, yeah. In the beginning, our partnership with the private sector wasn't smooth, unfortunately. The industrialists, the business community looked at this policy as counterproductive, as anti-productive to their business. And I think in the beginning, we didn't quickly catch the need to actually empathize with the private sector. We actually took the approach of being the true enforcers of the law, and it caused a lot of friction in the beginning years. Yes, it caused the shift, but there was a lot of friction and a lot of pain and a lot of, frustration. Am I there?
Yeah, thanks. We've lost you a little bit at one point when you were mentioning the friction that have been happening at the beginning of the process.
Okay, yeah, sorry, my internet is not stable. Yeah, so I was saying that that wasn't productive. We moved to another approach of actually developing a memorandum of understanding with the private sector federation of the country. And right now, we take the issues from the private sector on a case-by-case basis. If someone is a producer of a given product and is struggling with the alternatives to package the goods, we take it on together as government and private and the developer to actually look for alternatives here and there. There are some instances where we have to, of course, most instances we do import, but what do we import is we are importing something that is going to be feasible, that will be used another time, and we are importing knowledge as well, other than pushing the industrialists to actually figure it out themselves. So this is a developing country with a developing private sector, family. So we thought that and we are convinced that this is the right way to move on, to actually face the issue together as government and private. So I think that's what I wanted to talk about now. And going forward, we are looking at a possibility of starting an industry, a plant of manufacturing alternatives, bio-based alternative to plastics here in Rwanda. But we are looking at a scenario where government will actually inject the initial capital, and then we get private operators to come and operate the plant when it is already running. This we believe will be coming to sort the issue of packaging in the country at large. Thank you, Delphine.
Thank you, Juliette. I was about to ask you about looking forward, so you partially already answered. Thank you for that. My last question was really about what are Rwanda plans in the next steps to solve the plastic crisis. You already mentioned this partnership with private companies and innovation. Do you have other targets that you're looking into? You're still muted, I think, Juliette.
Sorry, I was talking to myself. Yeah, we want to boost the collection and recycling, because we have around 5 recycling companies, but the collection has not been efficient. We are coming up with a return model where incentives will be put in place, but incentives start with disincentives, unfortunately. So if you are asking to use plastics exceptionally, for the exemption to use a given type of plastic like PET, especially in carbonated drinks factories or industries, these we are going to be giving them a quota to use those PET bottles, but with a well-elaborated recovery system. So unless you show us a recovery system of the PET bottles, you're not going to be given the exemption to use them for packaging your carbonated drinks. So these industries are going to actually invest in a collection or return scheme, which is going to be feeding the recycling other products other than single-use plastics. So with this, we think it is going to add another tier on the management of used single-use plastics, be it PET plastics or even polyethylene or even polypropylene. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Juliette, for this way forward. I'd like to turn to Sander now. Welcome, Sander, in our event. As part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, you have many interactions with both governments and, of course, private companies. Can you give us your perspective on progress by governments and private sector around the commitments that have been made and the effectiveness of those commitments? And what can be different this time around to ensure that we have tangible outcomes in the end?
Yes, thank you, Delphine, and welcome everyone. Well, I mean, voluntary commitments and actions by leading governments and businesses have been absolutely crucial. It's crucial to have some front runners step up and pioneer solutions, push the ambition level, show what is possible. And that's why through our global commitment and our global network of plastic pacts, we've united more than 1,000 organizations now behind that common vision of a circular economy and concrete 2025 targets to realize that. And when talking about progress, in 2 weeks from now, we'll be publishing a major progress report on the global commitment, creating full transparency on all of these businesses and governments in that, on what progress they are making in the different areas of elimination, reuse, recycled content, and recyclability. So I think transparency on progress is crucial as an accountability mechanism to ensure that these commitments lead to real action on the ground. So voluntary initiatives and commitments are absolutely important and have already helped to accelerate progress. Equally, voluntary commitments alone will not be enough and will need to be complemented with more binding policies. We'll absolutely need both of these. And that's why last week we launched a very clear call for a global treaty on plastic pollution. And because this is a global issue and we absolutely need governments on a global international level to set a clear direction, set a clear framework for action that includes things like measurable global goals, translating that in national level targets and action plans, and again, coupled with robust monitoring to ensure there is transparency on progress. And we believe that's absolutely crucial to accelerate this, because setting a global direction, setting a clear direction at global level will give both businesses and governments around the world the real impetus to move forward more decisively in that direction. If we have a clear direction, it will enhance the confidence to invest in that direction, will stimulate innovation in that direction, can harmonize policy across the world in that direction. And this is really the moment to do this, because there is political momentum with over 2/3 of UN member states already expressed their willingness to explore such a global treaty, and many of them are actually very actively calling for it. There's industry momentum behind this, as next to the call we launched last week, we also launched a manifesto signed by 30 major businesses that were backing this call for a treaty. And there's broader societal momentum for this, with many leading NGOs and academics who have been explicitly calling for such a treaty. So our call to UN member states is now not to waste all of this momentum that there is now and basically use the next UN Environment Assembly meeting to formally adapt a mandate to negotiate and develop such a global treaty.
Thank you, Sander. So that was indeed one of my next question about engaging at a high level and how to ensure that we can have global agreements that would ensure economic systems that support circularity. So I wanted also to ask you about the levers that can help prevent the plastic pollution along the plastic value chain. We've discussed a little bit about the different alternatives that's really upstream on the plastic value chain. And I know that you regularly mention that we're not going to recycle our way out of this. Can you tell us a little bit more around that, and including the bottlenecks and how do we make this work between private and public sector?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, can't repeat it enough that we won't recycle our way out of this. And we're obviously not the only ones saying this. Many others are saying the same for many years. And actually, recent research and detailed analytical modeling in the Breaking the Plastic Wave study, for example, has only reconfirmed that. So reconfirming that a comprehensive circular economy solution is really the only way to really address this issue at scale and at the source. And such a comprehensive circular economy solution combines, first and foremost, the upstream solutions that reduce and rethink what we put on the market in the first place. And then secondly, the downstream solutions to collect and recycle everything that we do put on the market. And you know, the good news here is that through the Global Commitment and Plastic Pacts, more than 1,000 organizations, which include many businesses, governments, investors, NGOs, academics, etc., have all united behind that one common vision. So there is broader and broader alignment and recognition that we need that comprehensive solution and that there's no silver bullets like recycling, for example. However, we don't fully, while they all align behind this vision, we don't fully see that reflected in all of these organizations' efforts and strategies, because we still see that the vast majority of efforts are recycling focused. And while that's absolutely important, and recycling is still part of the solution, we need much more emphasis, ambition level, and investments to go into the upstream solutions. And we'd really like to see strategies of businesses and governments that are more balanced and better reflect the fact that the majority of the solution sits upstream. So we'd like to see bold action on eliminating unnecessary plastic items and shifting from single-use to reuse models, for example. And in order to inspire and support stakeholders in doing so, we'll be launching in around 1 month from now a upstream innovation guide, as we called it, which will have a lot of actionable frameworks and tools, as well as over 100 case examples that illustrate the enormous amount of things that are possible if we push the thinking upstream. And specifically for packaging, one of the main messages there is let's stop seeing this as a very narrow packaging focus and kind of packaging redesign challenge, but see it as a much broader, how do I deliver products and services to consumer challenge, and there to not just redesign the packaging, but completely redesign the product, the supply chain, the delivery model, the business model around it, because that's that more fundamental redesign is what we need to solve this issue.
Thank you for this vision. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work in countries that you've done through the Global Pact that some of the countries are implementing?
Yeah, I think where I stressed before the real importance of a clear common direction and common vision, because we're talking about fundamentally changing a system here, and the only way to do that is to have a critical mass of actors in that system all move in the same direction. So that's why we united a lot of players voluntarily behind that vision, but while we also call on the global treaty to actually mobilize the whole world behind such a vision and set a clear direction. But beyond a clear common vision and direction, when it then comes to translating or kind of realizing that vision in practice in different countries, it's crucial to realize that all countries have a different context, starting point, culture, stakeholders, and all of that. So that's why we complemented our global commitment, which acts as a convener at a global level, complemented that with a network of national or regional level plastic pacts. They all still start from that same common vision, which is absolutely crucial, but they then translate that in more concrete and specific targets for the country, roadmaps tailored to the country. So if we look at the roadmaps that our plastic pacts in Chile, in the UK, in South Africa have published so far. I think these are nice examples where you'll see the similarities and you see they're aiming for the same outcomes, being a circular economy for plastics. But equally, you'll see they're definitely not simple copy paste, and they have been tailored to a local starting point and context. So I think that's the crucial thing of global alignment on direction combined with tailoring that to the local context is absolutely crucial, because we'll need solutions at all levels to solve this issue.
Thank you, Sander, for this perspective. We have 1 minute left, but I would like to keep this minute to ask a last question to both of you on speaking about collaboration, transboundary nature of the problem. And Sander, you started to mention that in the global level of the solution and a call for global treaty. Can you also expand a little bit on the trade agreements, the regional agreements that will ensure that economic systems support circularity? And then I would like also to ask Juliette to speak about how Rwanda is joining a number of interventions at the global level to bring that discussion beyond the jurisdiction of the country.
Yeah, I think with the role of regional agreements and trade agreements, as you mentioned, I mean, for me it again comes down that we need. There's no single. I mean, it's really a transboundary problem, a global problem, and the plastic economy and the plastic kind of supply chains, they don't stop at country borders, right? They are very, very international. So we'll need that cooperation across borders, and why I think it's crucial to set that one direction and framework at global level is exactly to make sure that at all the other different levels, trade agreements between individual countries or kind of regional agreements, that they all align with that and kind of all have that clear direction to aim for, because it's indeed crucial that the political landscape or like policy landscape is setting the right incentives and is inducive to drive the change that we want to see, of course. So and I guess a clear global direction can really help with that, because we do see a lot of fragmentation today, both in policy but also in industry activities here and there, where people are just going completely opposite directions, lacking that clear truly global common vision.
Thank you, Sander. Juliette, can you share with us about Rwanda involvement in Africa and beyond? I wonder if Juliette is still online. She may have been disconnected, so maybe we can bring her back later. Thierry, I will hand over to you for the next part of the event on Q&A. I want to thank very warmly Sander for sharing his perspective on the plastic pollution problem, as well as Juliette. I think she can join us back again soon.
Thank you, Delphine, Sander, and Juliette. Hopefully she'll come back in later. But we are at our final session of this event, and I would like to invite Professor Roland Geyer to kick off the open Q&A.
Thanks, Dee. Yes, so at this point, we're bringing all the panelists together to try and answer some of the fantastic questions from our audience. Let's start it off with two questions from our audience. One is a really interesting one. It's what is the role of waste to energy and pyrolysis technology? And the second one is, what is the biggest obstacle to increase the value of plastic waste, or to how to valorize plastic waste? And maybe Kian can kick this off And maybe
Sure.
even with a very brief just explanation of pyrolysis, maybe not everyone in the audience even knows what that technology exactly is.
Sure. Okay, so pyrolysis, it's basically a process whereby we gasify plastic. So it's almost like ice, we gasify it to air, and then we distill or condense it down to water. We could do the same thing with plastic or hydrocarbon. So from plastic scrap, we could gasify that to create hydrocarbon gases, and then we condense it that we can make our own diesel. And that's exactly what we do in our company. We collect 60,000 tons of plastic scrap every year, of which 3% of that plastic scrap that cannot be converted into raw material anymore, we convert that into diesel through pyrolysis process. So by doing that, we can then, when we run that in full, we are able to power 1 megawatt of that renewable electricity so that our smart plastic can continue to run and recycle the 60,000 ton of plastic scrap that we collect without utilities. So we make our own electricity, we harvest our own rainwater. All we need is plastic scrap that can basically enable all that process. Now, the question, I like the question, very good question. The first thing is that what's the difference between waste to energy and pyrolysis? Waste to energy, in a way, is what we call a minimal utilization of plastic scrap. So we get very little electricity out of that. However, pyrolysis is a chemical recycling. We are converting this plastic scrap back to the a liquid feedstock. So basically, we can make new virgin plastic material again without fossil-based crude oil. So the technology is actually matured enough for us to do all of that. And it goes back to the value creation that we talked about earlier on. In order to enable this value creation, it is very important that we come together as a collaborative effort. So our company, for example, we basically combine 5 key stakeholders together, which is the collector, the converter, the co-creator, and the champion, followed by the conscientious consumer. So what we do, as an example, is that when we talk about how we create value, how do we valorize plastic scrap, beyond plastic-centric type of model, we can move to a life cycle-centric type of model. So an actual example is that we mobilize our collectors to collect ocean plastic. We convert it to a very high industrial material, fulfilling all the industrial standard. We create that with designer that makes it into award-winning designer chair. We work with big furniture brand, and finally, we sell it to the conscientious consumer, which is an international school. We piece together the entire traceability under a QR code. And with that, we create additional value, sustainability content that a virgin material would not be able to have that. So to valorize plastic waste, it is important that we look at it from different angle and to basically collect all the social and environmental impact. Thank you. Back to you, Professor Gaia.
Thank you very much. Excellent.
Can I maybe add to that, Roland?
Sorry?
Can I maybe add to that?
Yes, of course.
That same question.
Go ahead, Sander.
Yeah, I mean, starting with the energy recovery, like waste to energy part of the solution. I mean, for us, waste to energy is not part of the circular economy and is not part of the solution we work towards. And if I say for us, I mean us and the more than 1,000 organizations that signed a vision that explicitly states that. That being said, in a transitionary pathway towards that circular economy, this could be a transitionary solution, but also there we need to be very cautious and careful not to fall in the trap that many European countries find themselves in now, the trap of lock-in, where they've in the past built so many incinerator capacity, and that capacity, once it's built, you know, they need to feed the beast, as they say. So once it's built, it lives for the next 40, 50 years, and it needs feeding. So they now are in a situation where incineration plants are actually actively competing with recycling and eating, buying perfectly recyclable materials because they need to feed that machine that they've built in the past. So it can be part of the transitionary solution, but let's be very, very careful in planning capacity in order not to build too much incineration capacity, especially thinking about the many commitments being made to design more and more packaging recyclable. We need to take that into account when we think about how much incineration capacity we'll need in the future. So that's one thing. And then on how to valorize this, I think one thing that is a fact that I think we'll need to accept, in particular for I would say B2C products, B2C packaging, is that because they are so widespread across all the households globally, almost, right? Almost everyone in the world is using plastic packaging. Just collecting that, sorting that, and recycling that simply is much more costly than producing virgin plastics, which is done by a very, very optimized supply chain that we optimized over the last decade. So, and the proof of that is that almost all recycling happening today either gets external funding through municipalities paying for the collection or through EPR schemes, or they are run by informal waste pickers, which you could say the only reason that works economically is at the expense of their living quality and low wages, which you can hardly argue is a very desired outcome. So collecting, sorting, and recycling simply is more expensive than producing virgin plastics. And we're talking about, according to the recent Breaking the Plastic Waste study, talking about 30 billion every year to actually close that economic gap globally for all plastics. So that huge amount of 30 billion shows that this money is not simply going to come from government budgets, nor is industry voluntarily going to put that amount of money on the table. So policies like EPR that provide the dedicated, stable funding to collect and sort plastics are absolutely crucial, because without those, I don't see recycling scale significantly at all. So we urgently need to put some of these key policies in place if we want to scale recycling significantly.
Okay, excellent. Sander, thank you. I want to, before we move on, maybe just very briefly invite Michael. I know from my own experience that waste to energy pyrolysis are sort of the controversial end-of-life management strategies, and increasing the value of plastic waste, of course, is where the circular economy starts or ends if we don't succeed doing that. Michael, maybe just briefly an opportunity to share your views.
Yeah, thanks. I really agree with what Sandra just said, that the real way to solve this problem is to start with what goes into the circle, right? We talk about a circular economy. We spent a lot of time today talking about what are the various strategies to keep things from exiting the circle. But the key is, how do we stop too much plastic from getting into the circle in the first place? And again, the reason that there's so much plastic, and Sandra said it very eloquently, it's so cheap. So as a global group of consumers, we're addicted to very, very cheap virgin plastic. And so I think one thing, if we want to unleash the creativity of people all around the world, like Ken and people like that work for me, that are developing new materials to unleash that creativity, we need to have the cost of virgin plastic that's entering that cycle reflect the actual cost of society. So the simplest way to do that is for governments around the world to enact fees or taxes on virgin plastic. Once virgin plastic gets more expensive, then recycled plastic is much more attractive. Alternatives like biomaterials are much more attractive. And most importantly, reducing the amount of plastic becomes more important. Nobody will reduce the amount of plastic they use around the world until it's more expensive. And right now it's just too cheap. So we've reaped a lot of benefits from all the wonders that plastic brings to us, right? People complain about water bottles all the time, but if you live in a country where there's no clean water, having a water bottle with guaranteed clean water in it means something. There's a benefit. That's why people have done this. But to get out of this addiction that we're all in, we have to start by, in my opinion, making virgin plastic more expensive to reflect its true cost. I think that's the most important thing I'd add. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Michael. And that is a very nice segue into the next question here from our audience. And maybe I'll ask that initially to Delphine. Delphine, what do you think are the most important levers in truly scaling the circular economy, getting it off the ground and scaling it?
So thanks for this question. It's a great question. I think that the consensus is that there is a combination of solutions that have to be put in place to solve the problem. I'd like to build on the last point that both Sanders and Michael have made. And Michael have made on the price of plastics. I think that there are right now, and Karin Kemper had mentioned that in her remarks, there are some distortion in the price of virgin plastics, and some of them is linked also to subsidies. And one of the things that the COVID crisis has brought into light is exactly about these discrepancies between the price of virgin plastics and the price of recycled plastics. So that would be a big bottleneck to transition to circular economy, because the recycled plastics or any other material cannot compete with this convenience that Michael had just mentioned in terms of the behavior. So working around that, you have different actions that can be taken. Of course, we're proposing subsidies, and there you can direct the subsidies either to finance the collection of waste or to improve the waste management, or to work on the circular economy, because for some businesses, there is a cost also to change the business models that they have. So you can redirect the incentives and the subsidies to where it can have another impact. And that has also a lot of meaning in the current crisis when we think about the need for financing for health, for social aspects. So that would be, I think, a first thing to do. But then you have also a number of policy instruments like behavior nudges, look at labeling, or providing alternatives that are clearly labeled in terms of understanding their footprint as well. Because we speak about the price of plastic, but then what about the footprint of the other alternatives? Are they really truly implementable and usable and affordable in developing countries? How can we find this balance? That, I think, also raises a number of questions that we can work around at the country level depending on their context. So that would be some of the key levers that I would look at. And then all the regulations and enforcement instruments like bans and taxes are extremely important toward that solution to rebalance and incorporate the price of plastics into the equation. And all of the societal costs that are linked to it somehow.
Thank you very much, Delphine. I would actually like to ask the exact same question to Jane, who has the boots on the ground and is trying to implement actual reuse models. Jane, would you like to share your thoughts on the most important levers on scaling the circular economy?
I think it's. I mean, I certainly agree with everyone that if producers paid the actual price of plastic waste, if they were the ones who had to pay, to get the waste removed from the rivers, to do the plastic waste collection, to do all of these things, which are incredibly expensive, and for a lot of communities and city governments, etc., simply not affordable. So you have to throw it somewhere, burn it, etc. Then I think it would definitely change, right? And I think another when we look at reuse models, right? I think there has to be from some of the FMCGs we had a lot of pushback on the hygiene, right? And I think sometimes what we see is there's one standard for you buy packaging and it's everything is of course clean inside, but you bring it home and people fill it into containers that they're not super sanitized, right? I mean, I buy packaged coffee and I fill it at home into a container, and I don't remember the last time I cleaned that container, right? And that's okay, but then if it's refilled, then it's it has to be like clean, dry, sanitized, microbe testing, whatever. And I think that in the reuse case that is an issue. And I think there is investment needed to change these supply chains, and I think that the investment will only come if there is a big enough push. And I don't think it will ever, really come, the push will be big enough from the consumers to really say, okay, we're going to like change the entire system. And so there does need to be some push from the governments to say, okay, we need to have that, we need to get out of this, equilibrium where, the supply chains are like this. And so it's a lot cheaper. When in fact, if we all switched, then certain products would become cheaper. And this is why we're already seeing, as I mentioned before, we're seeing perfume refills, we're seeing rice refills, we're seeing other refills already existing on the market. And I think there just needs to be a little bit more of a push from the government, and also from the companies themselves.
Right. Thank you, Jane. So opportunities exist, operational challenges exist, can be overcome, but government intervention policies are critically important, I hear. And I'm very glad that Juliette is back, because that is a great segue into the next question, which I would like to ask Juliette. The question being, what are the best strategies, and I think that can be policy or other, to promote plastic recycling and maybe even reuse, if you have some views there? Juliette.
Thank you, Laurent. I think if I got the question well, the strategies that we can use to promote reuse, right?
Correct. Reuse, recycling. What are the best strategies to promote those two?
Okay. Yeah. First of all, I think for reuse, we have to make it hard for people to get the virgin materials. If, for instance, the carry bags are already there everywhere, you find a plastic carry bag at a very minimal cost, there should be no point for me to move around with a cloth carry bag, the more we make it hard for people to access the virgin materials, in this case, for purposes of this discussion, the carry bags, the more you're pushing me to the end of using what I have more and more. I think that would be a breakthrough for us to minimize plastic waste. The more I don't find plastic everywhere with a lot of ease, then I will be going into the space of reusing. And then recycling, we can promote recycling again if the new material is more expensive, it's more costly. If it is cheaper to go for the virgin materials, then you edge out the recycling companies because their business will not be viable. Again, to bring more recycling, the collection has to be really at another detailed level. How do we collect the old plastic items now that they are the raw materials that feed the recycling industry? So I think in a nutshell, we need to boost our collection, our recovery. We could have a different venues as to how to boost this, which incentives are there, who does it, and then making it hard to get the new materials, in my opinion.
Thank you so much for your insights, Juliette. So what I seem to hear over and over is make the desirable alternatives more available and more attractive, but at the same time make the undesirable alternatives less attractive and also less available. So it kind of takes both, right? Almost like a carrot and a stick approach at the same time. Moving on to our next question, and maybe we'll start with Sander there. So question from the audience. What are the economic downsides for companies adopting and embracing circular economy of plastic? Well, downsides or challenges, maybe, as another word.
Yeah, I think starting with looking at the system as a whole, and as quite a bit of research has shown, and recent Breaking the Plastic Wave study, one example of that, like the circular economy scenario compared to other scenarios, the business as usual or the recycling only scenario, etc. actually has the best economic, environmental, and also social in terms of job creation and climate outcomes. So at a system level, it's hugely beneficial. But obviously, that system then consists of many different players, and with all like major major transitions, there are people who are clearly winners. And I think people in the recycling industry who see their business growing massively, reuse entrepreneurs who see their business grow massively, all these type of things. But equally, there are people for who this transition is much more difficult. I'm thinking about the plastic producers themselves. Their whole business model, their whole supply chain operations is built purely to turn fossil fuels into plastics. That's what they do. And if we achieve a circular economy, then we'll need way more virgin plastics than we use today. So for them, this is obviously challenging. And I think this doesn't mean that they cannot become part of the solution. And actually, we see front-running raw material producers also starting to commit to the circular economy, realizing that if we only stay part of the problem, then the transition to the circular economy is going to, hurt us or kind of to hurt our business. While if we start to become part of the circular economy, actually that shift is beneficial for our business. So we've seen in the global commitment that just a handful of plastic producers has actually signed up to that, with a commitment that by 2025, a certain percentage of all the plastics they sell will be recyclable plastics and not virgin plastics. So becoming part of the circle rather than being those who, like in a straight line, just keep feeding in new materials. And the Indorama's, Borealis's, Kingfas of this world have started to commit to that. They really see that as an opportunity. So really shifting the business model from one based on extraction to one based on circulation and committing to that. And I think the pressure on them is rising for more of them to do the same, because there's more and more reports coming out about if all the brands, retailers achieve their commitments on virgin reduction, using more recycled plastic, doing more reuse, then that has a big risk on stranded assets, especially if you look at the many hundreds of billions that are invested or planned to be invested in the coming years to increase capacity. That's a major stranded asset risk that is started to be called out and started to get the attention of investors as well.
And there was actually a question, if I may just quickly add on, Sander. So the question, starting with a comment, was saying that there are $600 billion in investment in virgin plastic versus less than $2 billion investment in reducing plastic. So it says, so what does that mean for the next 5 years?
Can I add on?
Kian, go ahead. Yes, please.
Quickly. Yeah, let's talk about the challenge on sustainability. Let's shift gear and look at the inevitable change for plastic. Let's say we fast forward 100 years from now. What kind of civilization, what kind of relationship do we have with plastic? The way I see is that I think we still live in a world with plastic. However, our relationship with plastic will be very, very different. I see that in that world, we actually see a lot more non-fossil based plastic. Yeah. So the polymer actually comes from plastic scrap that we make into the feedstock, and then we continue to make plastic and we give it a second life and third life. It will be a lot more non-fossil based and hopefully 100% non-fossil based, so that it gives us that plastic neutral civilization. The second thing is that we are going to shift from single use to more than once. So we no longer use single-use plastic. We will design the afterlife of plastic so that we continue to use that more than once. And I think that's something that's very, very important. And the third thing is that collaborative. When we look at plastic, that whenever plastic changes form, like magician, when it goes from solid, from bottles to gas, and then from gas to diesel to electricity, as long as it is transforming itself like magician, each and every time when plastic transforms itself, it spits out value. It basically it creates the value creation that we are talking about. So the real problem that comes with plastic is that whenever it stays stationary in that form for 100 years, it becomes a plastic pollution. So the way we have to deal with plastic is almost like a juggler. We just make sure the entire hydrocarbon will go in that perfect circularity above ground, so that it's not something that we pull out crude oil from underneath the ground, made into plastic, use it once, and then send it back to ground. It will basically be that circularity above ground. And that would be the inevitable change that I would see. And some of the big brands already see that, and they are making promises. They are taking the early collaborative effort to actually make all this thing work. And to me, I think with the technology, and also what we see is that businesses are coming together with a collaborative effort to make all that change, which is super exciting. And we have World Bank organizing what we are doing right now, because World Bank understand by investing the right resources, the right funding in the right solution, and also the right bandwidth, bright young minds, like Sander here, that will make this thing happen a lot faster, so that we don't have to wait for 100 years. So that's my humble 2 cents. Back to you, Professor Geyer. Thank you.
Thank you, Kian. Very briefly, Sander, this was a very optimistic view going forward. Do you share this view, or do you see it slightly differently?
I share this view kind of to a large extent when it comes to like what's the vision where we want to go. I mean, obviously, I don't think we can wait 100 years to get there, not at all. And I think there is some acceleration towards the circular economy, but equally, the speed at which we're moving now is way too slow to get there in any reasonable time frame. So we'll need to massively accelerate further. And I'll stop here because I see time's up.
Indeed, time flies when you're having a great discussion. So we're moving in the right direction, I hear, but not maybe fast enough. So we want to accelerate at all levels of the circular economy, bringing the entire supply chain together, bringing private industry and governments and everyone together. That's what I hear going forward. Is there room for one more question, or do we need to wrap it up?
I think we have to wrap it up. I think this
That's too bad.
conversation could go on forever. It's been
It
so
sure
interesting. I just want to quickly invite Etienne Kachichan to give closing remarks. So he's a senior private sector specialist and also the mastermind behind this whole learning series. So just a few words to end this wonderful session. The floor is yours, Etienne.
Absolutely. I felt like, thank you so much. I felt like we're really getting into the meat at the end. But I want to really thank everyone from across the world for joining, and all the speakers who have taken their time off their busy day to join us here. Again, this is the third of the series, and we look for at least 7 to 10 more where we're covering the private sector's perspective on circular economy. My main takeaways from this, I guess, is that the pricing is a critical point and something that is a bit of an uphill battle until there's some kind of international consensus. And to me, it bears very similar to some of the issues that we're facing with carbon pricing. And to me, the most damning chart, I guess, is that after 30 years of, let's say from today to 2050, as Roland mentioned, we are only getting back to how we are today. That's scary, right? Because today is not so good. And I think what we're maybe missing is some of the technological innovations at a higher level that will really, help us solve this problem, while in the meantime, we're trying to plug the ship as well as possible. That's at least my current perspective. But I'm also very hopeful that, as many have mentioned, the innovation will come through and really help us find some of these more technologically advanced solutions of recycling the materials that we produce. So with that, again, I want to thank everyone for joining, and I really look forward to working with you more on this topic and integrating you more in the operational space as we move forward. Again, thank you so much to everyone and for Z for organizing this really masterful and wonderful session.